All right, well, we will get started. And thank you everyone for signing in for today's session. This is our second session targeted to help you with your accreditation application. And we've run these two workshops on the two areas of the application that we find can take the most time to work through. And generally it is the two areas of the application that we have to return for, as they need a little bit more detail in a lot of cases. So we hope that you find today's session practical, and it will leave you with a better understanding of the process of risk management and the importance of it within your business. So I'm very pleased to introduce today Derek Shepherd, our facilitator for this session. Derek is a tourism planning and management advisor with an extensive background in the airline, travel, tourism and accommodation industries. He has over 40 years experience at senior and executive management level with a number of high profile international companies, including Thomas Cook & Son, QANTAS, Flag International Motels and Resorts, Hayman Island Resort, Ansett International, Ansett Australia, and Big Four holiday parks. Derek is a past member of Tourism Australia's industry advisory panels for Asia, Japan, UK, Europe, the Americas and New Zealand, a member of the Australian Tourism Export Council, and a past chairman of the Adelaide Convention and Tourism Authority. He was a Victorian Tourism Awards judge for 3 years and chair of the Victorian Tourism Awards mentor panel for a further 3 years. Derek is a founding member of Tourism Macedon Rangers, past chair of Daylesford and the Macedon Rangers Tourism, and past chair of Great Ocean Road Marketing. As the principal of Arbor Consulting, a tourism planning and management advisory service, Derek has been conducting accreditation and star rating site visits for the past 9 years. So he's very well suited to today's session, having gone through a lot of this with newly accredited operators over the years. So I'll just go over some housekeeping quickly before we start. Your microphone has been muted and your camera is off. We will have questions at the end of the session, and we're asked to please use the Q&A box to submit those. And this session will be recorded and we'll email it out to you tomorrow, so you can come back and watch at your leisure and go over anything that you might want to revisit as you're working through your application. So that's it from me. Over to you, Derek.
Thank you very much, Grace, and good morning, everyone. And welcome to this webinar on risk management, and welcome back to those who attended the business planning and marketing planning webinar a couple of weeks ago. The webinar this morning is not quite as, shall we say, enjoyable as marketing. Marketing for a lot of people is a very enjoyable subject, whereas risk management is all about getting down to ensuring that your businesses are operating in a safe environment for both your customers and yourselves. Risk management, what is it and why is it important? This morning we're going to talk about what risk management is. We're going to talk about a risk analysis framework, and finally Grace will talk about the accreditation requirements and support. So risk management, what is it and why is it important? Well, risk management underpins the viability and sustainability of your business and is a critical document in ensuring you safely carry out your day-to-day business activities for both customers and staff. I cannot overstate its importance. Some people find the process difficult and arduous. However, it is most important you apply yourself to the process, and I will attempt to provide you with some guidance over the next 30 minutes. To try and cover this subject in 30 to 45 minutes is a challenge, so it will be an overview. Quite often, if you go on a training course on risk management, it will last anything from 1 week to 10 days or longer. But all we're trying to do today is to provide you with some guidance and some confidence in putting together a document that will enable you to successfully apply for accreditation. So we don't want it to be arduous, we don't want it to be difficult, but nevertheless, it is a very important document, and it does need to have some application of time on your part over the coming days and weeks. All businesses organizations, local government, etc., all have extensively documented risk management plans which identify a vast range of risks, all identified and categorized as to their likelihood and impact, along with mitigation strategies. We are all surrounded by potential risks to our safety, and all organizations, retail companies, supermarkets and the like, local government, Vic parks, Vic roads, hotels, caravan parks, school camps, all have extensive risk management plans to ensure that they deliver their products and services and experiences in a safe manner. Because we're all in the tourism industry, we're in the business of providing happiness and experiences and joy, and we want all of our customers to go home with happy experiences to tell their friends and relatives, so that they can all come back and provide you with additional business. But very occasionally things can go wrong, and that's where we need to have in place a document which identifies what those potential risks are and what we're going to do to minimize the risk, or if the risk does occur, what we're going to do to ensure it doesn't happen again in the future. One very tragic example of this took place a few days ago, you will all know, in Hall's Gap, where very, very sadly, a lady felt her death from one of the lookouts. And as a result of that, there will be extensive reviews of the emergency management plans, the risk management plans that were in place by the local government authority, that's the Northern Grampian Shire Council, by Vic Parks. And unfortunately, but as is the case, this will end up in the coroner's court. And that is a place that you and I never want to be. So bear that in mind as we go through this, because that's a worst case scenario and we have to plan for the worst case scenario. So risk management, what is it? A risk is a potential situation or event that will result in an undesirable outcome, as I've just described. A risk may arise from a chosen action or activity. Well, I've just glanced over the people that are attending this morning's webinar, and I see we've got people from food and beverage, accommodation providers, adventure activities, caravan parks, tour operators, destination management, transport companies, a whole range of activities. So your risk management plan and emergency management plan will be different according to the type of business that you have, because you will all identify different risks and different potentials for those risks according to your business. Risk management is the process of identifying risks, analysing and assessing them, prioritising them, and then ongoing monitoring and control. Effective risk management will ensure, as I mentioned earlier, the ongoing sustainability of your business. The risk management plan does underpin your business plan, so it is an essential part of the planning process that you go through and the review process that you will continually undertake as you move through. So why is it important? It minimizes the potential impact and business interruption, minimizes the potential costs from legal action, maintenance and asset replacement, particularly people that are likely to sue you for your inability to deliver on a promise. It helps protect your reputation and staff and visitors. By understanding potential risks to your business and finding ways to minimize their impacts, you will help your business recover quickly if an incident does occur. It can be a lengthy task, as I said at the outset. Some people find it arduous, but once you get into it, you'll find that you'll get on a roll and all of a sudden you'll realize that it is common sense, that all around you, you will identify these risks and you will then identify them and you will document them and you will plan to manage the risk. And that is good business practice and should be recognized as being fundamentally important by all operators and their representatives, regardless of the type of business that you are in, whether it's a service you're providing or whether it is a product that you're selling. consistent measures and across the board multi-level involvement is necessary. What that means is that you need to involve all of your staff and internal and external providers as well, because nobody has a mortgage on identifying a risk. I do it all the time, subconsciously, wherever I am, whether it's going to the Coles supermarket locally, because the biggest risk is walking across the car park to actually get into the supermarket. And what have Coles done to mitigate against that risk? Well, as we know, all major companies do the best they can, but there is no foolproof plan that will avoid potentially being knocked over by a car. And that can happen in your businesses as well. As I say, the worst case scenario is loss of life and having to appear in the coroner's court. I don't want to be a doomsayer, but nevertheless, it just does put that into some degree of context. So let's just talk a little bit about the risk analysis framework. There are 5 areas there. Establish your risk context, identify the risks, analyze the risks, evaluate the risks, and manage the risks. On the left-hand side, you can see you have to communicate and consult, first of all, to enable all that to happen. And then after that, all those actions have taken place, you monitor and review on a continual basis. Particularly if an incident did occur, then you would need to review, of course, what plans you had in place to mitigate that risk, and that will probably have to be reviewed and updated. These are the steps you take for your risk management plan. As I say, once you're established, you need to consistently monitor and review them. It is also important to communicate and consult with your staff, as I said just now, and external stakeholders throughout the process, and particularly once you have completed your plan. I always say to whatever business I'm with, if they're more than just one person owning a business, even if it's a one-person operation, you still need to have a plan. But if you have staff and you have staff meetings, I always say that on your regular staff meeting agenda, there should always be an agenda item, which is risk management. It's a standing item on the staff meeting agenda, or your toolbox meeting, or whatever you call it. Standing agenda item. So first of all, establish your risk context. As I said just now, we've got a dozen or more different types of businesses that are attending with us this morning. So it's patently obvious what industry you individually work in. What is your business's core activity? Well, you'll certainly know that. What are your business's aims and objectives? Well, they've been documented in your business plan. Who is involved with your organization, internally and externally? Well, internally, of course, all of your staff, and indirectly, members of your family, probably. Externally, all sorts of organizations, whether they're suppliers, whether they're industry organizations that you are members of, local tourism boards, and the like. And finally, what facilities do you have and or use? That is to say, the infrastructure that you have, your bricks and mortar, your canoes, your buses, whatever, your surfboards and the like. Whatever it is you happen to have as facilities, these need to be, you need to be obviously not just aware of them, which you undoubtedly are, but what the implications of those are in ensuring the safety of their users. So understanding the inherent risks in your industry and your type of business will help guide your risk management approach. Refreshing yourself of your business aims and objectives in the business plan will help when you are determining the consequences of various risks, i.e., are they likely to have a significant impact on your achievement of these aims? You should also consider your business's attitudes towards various types of risk. For example, there may be some tolerance for financial risk when trying new innovations or strategies, which will affect how you treat that risk. And we'll talk about that in a little more detail as we move through. So, identify the risks. That's pretty obvious. Consider both external and internal risks. And this can be an evolving document because quite often I'll go to particularly school camps, for example, where they're a provider of fun and enjoyment for young people. and their young people are well supervised, of course, by camp staff and school teachers. But there is an inherent risk in the activities that they undertake. So this helps, when you consider both external and internal risks, in the risk context, that will help you provide a holistic approach to risk management. And quite often I'll talk to people and say, look, you know, have you identified this risk or that risk? And quite often people say, no, we haven't thought of that. And sometimes it's staring you in the face. So don't be afraid to ask the advice of visitors, school teachers, guests, if they have identified any particular risk where they have felt uncomfortable, for example. So this can be a difficult part of the process. Risks are not only slips, trips, and falls, there are risks across all aspects of a business. Some techniques to identify risks include lessons learned from previous experience or the experience of similar businesses. So never be afraid to consult with colleagues. You probably all belong to industry associations, whether they're accommodation providers or activity providers, and you can share experiences to ensure that an experience of potentially a competitor, but nevertheless, we're all in this industry together and we're all here to help each other. You can learn from that, and by consulting with not just your internal stakeholders, but particularly external stakeholders. And in addition to industry and trade organizations, people like insurance providers or regional tourism boards and the like. So there's a whole raft of people out there that you can talk to, and they will be happy to share their experiences with you and provide you with some potential advice and guidance. So some examples of external risks. So they fall into three areas. There can be more, but we talk about human risks, natural risks, and economic risks. And it's not until you put them down on a piece of paper or on a screen, as we see here, that you realize what they are. Excuse me. But they are obvious, but it's good to see them written down, and you might have some others that you might want to add to them. But you can see a number there that we have put down on this screen. And an external risk that nobody saw coming, of course, was a global pandemic. And we don't need to talk about that specifically this morning, because we're all well aware of the impact that that has had, but also what the opportunities might be presenting themselves in the years to come. So here are some examples of internal risks. Again, the slips and trips, as I mentioned just now, the OH&S risks, operational risks, HR risks, and the like. And there is another risk here, which doesn't get mentioned too much this morning, but it's to do with the way we present ourselves in the digital world and what that can do for us. Potentially, primarily good, but potentially sometimes not so good when you get disgruntled visitors that they perceive that you weren't able to deliver on a particular, what they thought was a promise. And then all of a sudden in the digital media, we've got a little bit of a crisis to manage. So these are all different types of risks that you need to be aware of and how you're going to manage them. And in particular, monitor sites such as TripAdvisor and also any other sites that you may appear on where guests or visitors or customers can leave comments. So having identified them, potentially, you need to analyze those risks. What is the likelihood of the identified risks occurring? And what are the consequences to your business if they do occur? So here are 5 levels that one could apply. This is one suggested scale for likelihood. You can use any scale as long as you understand the determination of the ratings. So these are some words that are fairly obvious: rare, unlikely, possible, likely, and almost certain. So we need to apply those levels of likelihood to each of the risks that you have identified. and only you will be able to do that, of course, and it can be a little bit subjective, but it would be based on a degree of experience. So using those 5 likelihoods, there is a description for each likelihood as to how you might determine the likelihood that you would apply to that particular risk or to any individual risk. I don't want to read each of those verbatim, but you can see that there is a description against each of those likelihoods. So just moving along. And then we'll have the consequences of the risk. How is it going to impact on your business? And we need to allocate one of these: critical, major, moderate, minor, or insignificant. Now, you know how likely it is that the risk will occur or not, and you'll need to work out what that impact will be if the risk occurs. This is another example scale, as I said. Again, you can use any scale as long as you understand how to apply it to your identified risks. And here is another template, again, applying a certain set of circumstances relating to serious injury or minor injury. Well, starting at the top, the critical one was the death, all the way through to insignificant where no medical treatment was required, you know, a minor trip or fall, but nothing necessary to be concerned about. And the application across that template of what the of how that pans out, both from a financial point of view, the services, the impact on your business objectives, and your business reputation. These are some examples of how to assign a consequence, as I say, based on different risk categories. Whichever scale you use for consequence should have defined limits for each consequence rating. So it is clear to everyone involved with the risk management process how the impact has been measured and defined. This could be something you do in consultation with internal and external stakeholders, as I've described before, or you can use a predefined scale. There are many examples that you can look at in Google. The important thing is not to get into the complex multi-page documents. Choose templates that are appropriate to the size of your business. As I say, it's arduous enough as it is. We want to keep this as simple, but as relevant and practical as possible. So as I said just now, we evaluate the risk and we assign a level for each risk based on the likelihood and consequences and prioritize them. Having prioritized them, then you can assign their overall risk rating. You may find some risks are incidental and others are urgent and important. As I say, it will all depend on the type of business that you are in and whether you are a one-person operation or somebody or a business that employs a number of people. So now we get on to the risk matrix. I'm sure most of you will have heard of the risk matrix. There's any number of them that are available online, but this one that's shown here is normally shown with colors. So the low risk boxes would be green, the moderate risk would be yellow, the high risk orange, and the extreme risk red. So down the left, we've got the consequence, starting with insignificant, number 1, through to critical, number 5, and across the top, the likelihood of rare, through to almost certain, number 5. So if you had a risk that was, say, minor at number 2, but likely at number 4, then that becomes a moderate risk. So you'll need to apply your strategies accordingly to identify it, which you would have done, what the consequences to your business are, and importantly, what mitigation strategies you will employ, and also importantly, who takes ownership for that and is responsible for monitoring it. If we take another one, a consequence, so if we had a major consequence at number 4, but it was very rare that was going to happen, that also is a moderate risk. The extreme end, we've got, say, a major at number 4, but it's highly likely, number 4, that then becomes an extreme risk. And you apply your ratings accordingly. Extreme and high risks in this scenario are unacceptable, and they do require immediate and ongoing attention. So if you identify any high risk or extreme risk risks within your business, then you need to be continually watching them or doing something to reduce that risk. Or if you can't reduce it, then ensure that you've got mitigation strategies in place that are going to be highly effective. Another way of looking at it is through a risk heat map. Similar sort of situation with colors here, slightly different colors, but the same principles, where you've got the risk, but the impact on the left and the likelihood moving across to the right. So if you've got a very high risk, the impact and the likelihood is also medium through to very high, then that is red in the high area. However, if you've got a medium impact with a low likelihood, then that's at the second category on the risk heat map, being low. There's a lot of information that I'm imparting here, and as Grace said at the beginning, it's difficult to remember all of this. So remember that we are recording this, and you will be able to review it tomorrow once it is sent out to you or is online, and you can go back and revisit and just to update yourself on what I've described to you this morning. So having identified all these risks, how can we manage it and mitigate against the likelihood? So identify how you can minimize the likelihood of the risk occurring, identify the proposed action if the risk does occur, identify the people responsible, as I said just now, for managing the risk, and document your risk register accordingly. So say, now that you've evaluated your risk, you can see your overall risk profile. You can identify how to minimize the likelihood and consequences of the risk. These are your mitigation strategies. You should also identify your contingency plans if the risk does occur, even despite these efforts. So, as I said earlier, no plan can be totally guaranteed to occur, but contingency plans need to be available to be put into place if the efforts that you've identified are not working. You need to document your analysis, mitigation, and contingencies in a risk register, and you should also include a process for confirming where and how risk needs to be monitored. So we have a risk management plan and we have a risk register. So the two sit side by side, and we use the matrix to enable us to document the risk register. So some examples of risk registers. There are a number of them that you can see online. Again, because of, again, looking at the businesses here, we're talking about primarily small businesses. We want to keep this document as, not going to use the word simple, but readable, understandable, and applicable to your business. Now, I can see one or two businesses here that will potentially have quite a number of risks attached to the products and services that they provide. I'm not going to name names this morning, but you will know who you are. And because you will have been licensed by different authorities in Victoria, they will have already requested from you, I'm sure, risk management plans and risk matrices. But here's an example of a risk register for an organization. Very simple: name of the business, date of the plan. That's important. When was the plan developed? And when do you plan to review it? This one is on an annual basis. And on the left, we can see what the potential risk and hazard is, the likelihood, and the action to be taken to reduce and prepare for the risk. This is a very simple one. It's very good, actually. When is this going to happen? By whom? And what is the proof of action undertaken? It's all very well saying that you're going to do it, but what evidence do you have that shows that you have implemented this register? I quite like this one. You could also re-evaluate your residual risk after applying the mitigation strategies. E.g., does the medium risk then become a low risk, or does it still remain medium, for example? Now, here's another example of a risk register. On the left, we've got the category: strategic, operational, and the like, what the event might be, loss of income, loss of premises, people, the nature of the risk and description, economic. Brexit, for example, is having an impact on a large number of people potentially. The pandemic, the likelihood, the impact, and then the risk score, colored as I described earlier on, and what the basic mitigation strategies might be. And one more, again, categories down the left across a couple of different segments: employees, customers, a description, what the consequence might be. So in the first one, we've got an employee who's taking too long to contact a sales lead. And this time may not decrease with the new sales program. So therefore, the consequence of that is we're not going to see an increase in sales revenue. So the probability is high, the impact is high, the risk level is high. And so what are we going to do? And then we've got the owner of that and what the residual risk level might be. And finally, a fourth type of risk register. This is an example of a risk that occurred to operations as a result of COVID-19 lockdowns. So it doesn't apply to everybody, but certainly had a significant impact on this particular provider because there was an increased volume of online sales, as a lot of businesses that providing products are experiencing. But they had limited call center availability in terms of human resource, and so they had to required a reduction in the automated credit card purchase authentication measures. Now that's pretty risky. So the risk severity is high, and what the duration was, policy reference, mitigation measures, mitigation status, and the point of contact. So COVID has thrown up a whole range of challenges in the risk management environment, and a lot of people, a lot of businesses have had to revisit their risk management plans and take action accordingly. So having gone through that process, and again, I want to repeat, whilst it may be a little bit arduous, make it relevant to your business. I'm trying to cover all scenarios here, whether we're a one-person operation or a business that has maybe employs several hundred. The same principles apply, but it just has to be relevant, readable, and applicable. So risk management is an ongoing process that requires continual monitoring and review as your internal and external operating environment changes. By updating the likelihood and consequences of risks as circumstances change, such as legislative changes, and we're seeing quite a lot of that at the moment, political events, staff turnover, etc., you ensure you are aware of your current risk profile. Not your profile from 5 years ago or even last year. The example earlier didn't include social media, for example, and that's a very important area that you need to address, of course. This will help you to be ready to react and recover. You also need to ensure your mitigation strategies are still relevant and best practice. I'm a born optimist, so given that we've now coming out of 2020 and into 2021, I am confident that we're going to see amazing growth back in the tourism industry over the next 1, 3, and 5 years. From a business planning point of view, I suggest you're probably looking at this stage 2021. Let's take one step at a time. But then beyond the first year, then you need to be looking at 3 and 5 years. And I think that the potential for growth and success, looking at all of these businesses here, is absolutely going to be fantastic. So, you know, think positive and we'll get some good results. So you also need to update your risk management plan when one of your identified risks occurs. As I mentioned earlier on, you should review your mitigation and contingency strategies to identify what worked and what didn't. Document your lessons learned, update the likelihood and consequence of the risk, and ensure all staff have been consulted and communicated with. That's very important, the last part of that. Now, when I visit businesses and for accreditation and the like, I always want to see the risk management plan, and I like to see the risk register. But a couple of pointers in terms of practicalities on a day-to-day basis, in addition to documenting all of these identified risks, you should ensure that your property and premises have emergency and evacuation procedures in place, that there is an emergency evacuation plan in relevant public areas, which identifies escape routes, identifies the location of first aid kits, fire extinguishers, emergency assembly location, and the gas cutoff point. It's amazing how many emergency evacuation plans I see that don't have a gas cutoff point identified. If you've got gas on your premises, the emergency services will want to know where it is. And indeed, members of the public will, because that's one of the first things you'll do is switch that off. The other thing that we need to have are appropriately located first aid kits, and each first aid kit needs to have an inventory in it. How often do I look in a first aid kit and it's a jumble? Well, that's not good enough. We need to open the lid and we need to know exactly what's inside. So an inventory of the contents of a first aid kit, very, very important. Incident report form. So incident report forms, even though, particularly at school camps, the schools will have their own incident report forms, it is incumbent upon all business operators and tourism providers to have an incident report form. And also a list of emergency contact numbers that is easily accessible to staff and guests. And usually those emergency contact numbers are displayed alongside the emergency evacuation plan so that people can see what the local number is for the police or the hospital or the dentist or whatever it is, particularly in accommodation providers, but all emergency contact numbers should be displayed. And firefighting equipment, obviously, fire extinguishers that are regularly maintained by the local fire authorities or a dedicated designated contractor. And it's always desirable to have at least one member of staff trained in first aid, I should say, and available at all times. So those are just some practical examples of ensuring that your business is well prepared to manage incidents on a day-to-day basis. As I say, it's not an easy subject, but having said that, this presentation will be available to view a little later, and Google will provide you with different types of templates relevant to the size of your business. So that's about as far, I think, that I can go at the moment. We've had almost 45 minutes. I think if I did any more, it would be information overload and people's eyes will be glazing over. So take all that information on board, treat it seriously, and with a degree of appropriateness to your business, I'm sure you'll be able to put together a relevant document that will enable you to successfully apply for accreditation. But importantly, it will underpin the success of your business plan. Thanks, Grace.
Thank you, Derek. That was really, really good and easily stepped out the process for everyone there. So thanks for your time and your insights with that. It is, as you say, it's a prescribed process. There's not really much deviation. You have to follow those steps. But as you said, just look on Google for some templates, and as long as you understand the template that you're using and you understand the likelihood scale and the consequence scale, then that's enough. As you said, it doesn't have to be something you do solely on your own. You can consult with everyone and make use of templates and conversations with your staff, because your staff, if you do employ staff, they'll be involved in different areas of your business day to day that you might not have that direct oversight of, and they can pick up things that you wouldn't necessarily see as a risk, but they're doing that every day and they see that that's something that needs to be addressed. So in terms of the accreditation requirements, we do need documentation that basically covers everything that Derek's gone through today. So we need something that shows you've gone through a risk assessment and evaluation process. You've got that documented. You've got your minimisation strategies in place and the people responsible for those minimisations. And you do have contingency plans as well. So it's not just mitigation, it is, well, if the risk does actually happen, how can you recover from that? And going that extra step and doing that residual risk rating, so understanding with all of your mitigation in place, does that risk then go from medium down to low, or is it still a medium risk? That's recommended. I think it's good to have that in your risk register, but for accreditation, it's not necessary. So you can just kind of, once you've got your contingency plan, that's kind of where it can stop your accreditation. But it is such an important part of your business planning. We do recommend that you go that next step and have a full understanding of your risk profile and where you sit. And I mean, it can be really good with that risk heat map that you showed earlier, Derek. So once you've kind of evaluated your risks, you can see, okay, so I've got this number of high risk and this number of medium risks. If you plot that on the heat map, that gives you a really good understanding of your overall risk profile. And you might find you've got quite a lot sitting in that orange and red area. So then once you apply your mitigation strategies, if you then do a residual risk rating and plot again on a heat map, you can then kind of compare and see, oh, okay, well, I've brought down a lot of those orange and reds down into maybe more orange and green. And that can be something that insurance companies look for as well, in terms of what's your overall risk profile and how are you addressing that. If you do have it documented down, that's going to help in your conversations around your insurance premiums. And I know a lot of what we're saying, people think, well, it's just common sense. And it might be, but you do need to have it documented down for all potential circumstances that could happen. And so just moving on to the next slide, if you can, Derek, there are resources and templates in your accreditation application. So if you click on the blue question mark next to the question that says, does the business have a risk management plan? That will bring up this screen here. And again, there's the whole process that we've gone through today is briefly summarised, so you can refer to that. And there's some samples and templates for management, risk management and risk registers in the online platform as well. So that is all there to help you. Please do make use of that. So I think that's probably it for us. So if anyone does have questions, please submit them in the Q&A box down the bottom now. We do have a little bit of time. I understand it is a complex subject and you might be sitting there just information overload. So it's very understandable. But Derek, I've got a few questions while we wait for people to get going with theirs. So we've talked a lot about it's important to monitor and review your risk management practices frequently. And as you said, it can be part of your standing monthly team meetings or whatnot. What would you say is the minimum time schedule for reviewing your risk management practices? And would that depend on the size of your business and the type of business, like some that have more inherent risks than others? Should they be monitoring more regularly?
Yes, I think you're absolutely right that depending on the type of business that you operate, particularly if it's an activity, like people that provide school camps, for example, will continually review their risk management plan and their risk matrix and endeavour, as you said, to move from, say, red or orange into yellow or green. In terms of the regularity of it, it is a continual process depending on, again, the type of business that you have. But at the very minimum, I think you should be reviewing it on a quarterly basis, just to read through. And I think, again, that to have it continually on your as an agenda item, even if there is nothing to report, it's just good discipline to keep focused on that subject because it is so important. You know, so often an event can occur out of the blue when you least expect it. And it comes out of nowhere and all of a sudden it takes everybody by surprise, and that's a reality check. So I think on a quarterly basis, personally, but if an event does occur, well, then that will cause you to revisit it immediately. And it might be more regularly on a monthly basis if you were, say, a school camp, for example, or others where potentially your customers are being exposed to some kind of activity which could cause accident.
Yeah, great. So quarterly, thank you. Yeah. We have a question coming in from Damien. Now, this is a very timely one, given the events of this year. So he's asking, how important is documenting your economic risk, given that it can be impossible to predict and there's not much that you can do when it happens? So, yeah, any thoughts around economic risks and how to kind of identify those when it literally could be anything that happens, such as we've experienced this year?
Yes, well, economic risk is very difficult to forecast. You know, one can only keep abreast of what we are advised in the media in terms of short, medium and long-term economic plans by state and federal governments and also globally, because, you know, in other environments where inbound is a significant contributor, say, to your business, and there are specific issues going on in, say, China or Japan. I can recall some years ago where the Japanese market was being quite temperamental and was focusing more on Hawaii than, say, on far north Queensland, for example, and certain strategies had to be put into place to address that. But it is very, very difficult. What one does need to try and document is, you know, cash flow, what access you have to financial resource in the event of a downturn, whether it's local, intrastate, interstate, international, whatever market you happen to be in, and to ensure that you have a financial plan in place and the potential, say, to borrow in times of unforeseen downturn in turnover. And only you will know what tolerance levels you can take on board depending on the type of business you have. But you should document, I believe, what your financial tolerances are and what sources of funding and lending you may have in those circumstances, and whether or not you can afford to meet the repayment requirements. But overlaying that with economic forecasts, yeah, it's if you can do that, well, good luck.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, it's important to note that your risk management doesn't just sit on its own. It's not just a document you do once and review quarterly and leave it in the risk management drawer. It does interact and underpin all of your other policies and procedures and plans. So your business planning should be informed by your risk management and vice versa, and obviously financial planning. But yeah, it can be difficult to identify a particular economic risk, and that's something we don't want people to kind of, get bogged down in, oh my gosh, I have to identify every single risk and know exactly how much it's going to cost me. It's more just to be aware of there is a potential event that could happen that could affect my economic situation. And if it does happen, as you said, what resources do I have to draw on? So it's not necessarily saying, oh, there'll be a pandemic happening, which no one predicted at all. It's just awareness of, something that could happen, and what can you do to draw on any resources that you've got in terms of lending capacity or understanding how much you can borrow. And as we said earlier, documenting this all down will help you if you do need to go to the bank. If they can see that you're very conscious of the risks and how everything does play into other aspects of your business, they might be more likely to say, oh yeah, you're a responsible business, we're happy to lend you some money, and we can see that you've got the strategies in place to manage what we're doing for you, and eventually repay that loan if it's a loan. I think that's probably it from audience questions. So I'd like to thank you again for taking the time, Derek. I know it's a bit of a dry subject, but we have really, really appreciated everything that you've gone through today. And as we've said, we'll send out the recording so you can go back and pause at different aspects of the process. And if you do have any questions about this, please get in touch with me. I'm happy to walk you through the process again as needed, and Google is always there as well. But yes, we'll send out the recording for you, and I look forward to seeing all of your applications for accreditation coming through soon. Now, I do just want to mention as well, in our industry support hub on the VTIC website, we do have resources from our partners at Adroit Insurance and Risk. So they've provided these risk profile documents that the insurance industry uses for various types of business. So from like a cafe or a horse trail riding business, they are lengthy documents, and I think it's good that you have gone through this webinar first before you would go on to read those. So you've got a bit of an understanding of the risk management process. So they're really good in terms of stepping you through how the insurance industry might view your type of business and how they would see some potential risks in your situations. There is an explanation video from Adroit on how to read these profiles. It's about 5 minutes long. So I'll include the links to those in the recording video as well. And again, if you do have any questions about those, please let me know, or I can pass you on to our partners over at Adroit. So if you want to get in touch with me for any of these questions, you can email me at accreditation@vtic.com.au, and my phone number is 7035 5719. So that is it from us. Thank you so much everyone who joined for taking the time, and thank you, Derek, and I hope everyone has a wonderful Christmas and New Year's. This is our last session, and hopefully you'll have a very busy summer. So thank you, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.